Today we are reviewing How to Reassess Your Chess by Jeremy Silman. This is part of my quest to review all of the books, to study and review all of the books in the ChessDojo training program. This book was not available to me as a kid, so it's kind of interesting for me to go and look at it. Very interesting. Many of my friends have enjoyed this book. And Sagar Shah, a friend of mine from India, really enjoyed it. And then, so that's why this book is especially popular in India. Okay. There are several things that are special about this book. But for me, what's most interesting about it is that it's one of two books which I think give a full-fledged philosophical approach to how to make strategic decisions in chess. The first of these is My System by Aaron Nimzovich. And that book, I think it's a classic. I wanted to have it in the program, but it was seen as, it makes people angry because a lot of the things are old-fashioned. And really, to appreciate that book, you need a historical context to understand a lot of the ideas that Nimzovich is wrestling with. And so that's why this book is especially interesting then, because it then gives us a full-fledged approach. And so while I talk about that, I'm just going to put up the basic skeleton of what that looks like here. So these are the basic dimensions of the game according to Silman. Okay. One thing I think is interesting is every single player has a philosophy of the game. It might seem weird to you. I mean just even absolute beginners. You are bringing something to the table, and a lot of times, most of the time, that approach isn't even explicit in your mind. So I think a big value of trying to outline a philosophical approach is just to try to be explicit about what your chess values are. Most players don't, and they have maybe, especially very experienced players, have like a knowledge of positions in their mind, and that's important, of course, but they haven't like explicitly said what they think their chess values are, which I think is a very important task. And even if you aren't going to do it in some grand way like Silman does, it's important to be aware of it at some level. And studying this book, even if you disagree with it, will give you a touchstone, a comparison of your own chess values. Okay, so one thing I think is interesting, for example, is for myself, I've studied a lot of classic games, and even though Smyslov didn't write any kind of work, when I study Smyslov's games, I'm like, oh, this guy mostly has my chess values. I understand where this guy is coming from. And that's very comforting. Obviously I'm not at Smyslov's level or anything, but when the guy makes moves, I generally understand what the thinking framework is. And of course, he wrote a little bit. I thought some very terse but good words in, say, Endgame Maestro, that book. And, but it wasn't some full-fledged system. There's a lot of books out there who offer like chapters on interesting stuff in chess. It's not unuseful, but it's not like a system. For example, in our program, we have Simple Chess. That's a great book, but it sounds almost like a system, but it's not. We have books like the Dvoretsky series, and those are little bits here and there. But in a lot of ways, that book is an anti-system book, and there's a lot of anti-system thinking out there. For example, when you turn on the computer, it kind of seems like there's sometimes an anti-system, but even the computer has an algorithm for guiding decisions. And so that's why I really don't believe that there can be an anti-system, right? Some people are like, don't be dogmatic. But we have priors that we bring to the table whenever we look at a chess position, and at the very least, we should become explicit about them. So this is a position, there's a black to move. Now, if you want, you can think about what you would like to do in this position. One thing I think I have in common with Jeremy Silman is I've spent decades of my life looking at positions with a wide variety of players, of different levels and talking to them about decisions like this. Most of your chess decisions are actually not going to be tactical. It might be true that the game is decided in tactical moments, but most of your decisions are not going to be tactical, and they'll turn on decisions like this. And we want to have some kind of systematic way of thinking about the position. So I gave this position to Jamil. He suggested move after move, and he got them all wrong, and he's around 2,000 chess comps, so just give you an idea. I definitely think this book, 1,400 to 2,000, maybe a little higher even. I found it useful. Okay, so let's talk about it. I'll just show you the correct move. The correct move is to take the thing, and I know the prejudices that led Jamil not to like this move, and I think many other players would have the same prejudices, so let's talk about it. Black fears that regardless of how white takes, white will get a connected pass pawn. And I remember as a kid listening to some 1900 player, and he was like, of course white is better, they have a connected pass pawn, in a mildly similar position. And I was lower rated then, so it was kind of like hard not to believe him. And secondly, in this position, you could say, well, I have this abstract thing of the two bishops, and I'd rather not give it away, right? But let's look closer. Now, first I want to try to put in Silman's words. For Silman, what we have here is an initiative against the king, right? We saw that earlier with the dimension of king safety. And then here it's really important to see, which I guess white's best move, that, and this is on the chapter of the knights, that this is an amazing blockading piece right here. Actually, I think I got the position wrong. I think the king's on h8, but you know what? It doesn't even matter. So, in this position, what he wants you to see is that the knight is not movable. And I would want to add a couple things just from my own 2 cents. And that is that this knight has only one dream as I can see it so far, and that is to come and maybe even occupy that square. And so what I'm doing by taking is I'm killing this knight's dreams. And when he goes here, then we're ready to dominate him again with c5. Further, then I want to kind of talk about the opposite color bishops and the fact that we're going to make a maneuver like this soon and dominate the light squares. And so, right, like a clear advantage and very difficult for white to play against. And there's the bummer really for white too now is there's no cohesive plan for white to even play with at this point. Okay, so that's an example. In this case, we have the superior minor piece, right, being the knight. And we have the pawn structure, which in some ways, if you wanted to, you could argue is better for white. We had space. If you wanted to, you could say white has a little bit more space there too. Materials equal. Control of a key file, we're going to fight over the D file. At a first glance, that position might seem like it was better for white because white will get the D file. Control of a hole or key square. And that one's interesting because the hole was actually E5 and we eliminated the knight. We also eliminated his best piece. I think Jamil did not understand that. Lead in development. Interesting question there because with white's technically ahead in development, but his pieces are terrible, especially the two minors. Initiative, we can say black will develop an initiative on the light squares. King safety, well, if black gets the bishop to b7, obviously black will have a better king. And then statics and dynamics. I'm going to return to that in a little bit. So what Silman would like you to do in all of these positions is to develop a kind of calculus of going through these factors in your mind. And at a certain point, if you do it enough, it'll become a little bit unconscious. But when we are explicit about it, to do this and to think about this variety of things when we make our decisions. It's a give and take. You don't get everything, right? It doesn't matter which chess philosophy you have, you never get everything. And so you can see that there would be things in there that Jamil has prejudices against, the two bishops and the connected pass pawn. And, you have to be able to weigh these other factors that are going on. And to my mind, really, my little thinking about philosophy, I really liked in that position that we're killing the bishop on e3, we're killing the knight on a3. Okay. So I just want to add my own little 2 cents. Here's my 3 dimensions, and I'll tell you why I like this a little better. When you look at Silman's list, you could say it's really the same thing. You could say this is material, and these 2 things, lead in development and initiative, are talking about time, and then the rest is quality of position. One reason I like keeping quality of position as its own thing is that there's so many more things that we can add. I feel an infinite amount of interesting things that can happen in terms of quality of position that you'll never be able to, it's never possible to enumerate. There's things of color complex domination. In that position, we could talk about the bishop on c8 dominating the light squares. That's its own special thing. We can talk about in an endgame with 2 connected passed pawns and a rook endgame and how powerful that suddenly becomes. The rook pawn versus the knight. All these things are related to quality of position. And so to me, it doesn't make sense really to stop it at any given number. Also, I think 3 is a mythical number, so that's why I like it. But again, no one's actually written this treatise with the 3 dimensions, which I would like to believe is the most popular when I hear people talk about it. Kasparov has talked about 3 dimensions, others, but no one, again, has written a treatise. So even if you want to adopt my view, right, what I think is important is really what it's about is seeing different points of view in terms of philosophy and then adapting what you will. And then ideally, if you can find some kind of world champion like I did, where you're like, oh, even though this person didn't say that much in terms of some grand theoretical scheme, I understand what their chess values are, right? And that's a continual process for us to develop. Okay, one thing I'd like to do is a couple minor quibbles and to say something a little bit about the text. This thing is huge. And one of the things that's interesting to me about his book is that he self-published it, which was very clever, probably financially clever too, but it allowed him complete freedom to do whatever he wanted. A huge book with text, you can't really see it that well, but with text that's very easily legible because it's a bigger font, right? Most publishers wouldn't let you do that. Also, it's clear that he's adding a lot of material in each edition. And in fact, there's so much new games and stuff in the 4th edition. I'm like, well, clearly this is different than the 1st and 2nd and 3rd editions. Also kind of cool for the dojo, there's a whole thing in the back where Silman is addressing a bunch of questions on chess.com, and that was something that our David Proust facilitated for him back in the day. And now a quick plug for our video. We did a video remembering Jeremy Silman. You can watch that here. And what we realized in that video was like, oh, right, this guy's books are the most prominent throughout the program because we also have his Endgame book, which people also like a lot. Okay, so one thing I want to say is some of the examples I wasn't entirely thrilled with, especially in the first 2 chapters, the superior minor piece and pawn structure. But then the biggest problem, and I'm not even sure if this was in the original Reassess Your Chess, but the statics versus dynamics things feels like an addendum to me, because that's a thing that especially was popularized by Dorfman. Dorfman was worked with Kasparov way back in the day. And Dorfman has developed this whole thing on statics and dynamics, which is interesting. I've never, it's an interesting philosophical thing. It's never been that helpful in talking about what's going on in chess positions to me. And in this book, it's the shortest chapter by far. And I was kind of hoping like, oh, Jeremy, you're going to break it down for me in some kind of didactic way. But I didn't feel that really got worked out. in any case, this is a very important book, I think, especially whether you're in the program or not, between 1400 and 2000. And we have several books like this which really help to develop your positional understanding. A couple I'll just name. We have Evaluate Like a GM by our friend Eugene Perelstein and Nate Salon. We have Simple Chess, right? And then we have a bunch of annotated books. And with annotated books, for example, I was thinking as well that in some ways you could say New York 1924, even though it doesn't lay it out in any systematic way. If you read it, you can, but this is by Alekhine. If you read that book, you can be like, oh, I think I know what the philosophy here is. Art of Attack, which I recently reviewed, you could derive a philosophy of chess from that as well. Okay, so there it is, Reassess Your Chess by Jeremy Silman.